Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM's POTUS.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM for Wednesday, November 20th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, Trump has named a few more important names to fill out his administration. We have former WWE CEO Linda McMahon named to be the new Secretary of Education. She served as the administrator of the SBA in the previous Trump administration. And we have Dr. Oz, who is nominated to be the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So, Tom, what do you make of these two new cabinet picks?
They're fine. I have no problem.
You love them all, don't you?
I don't love them all. I just don't have a problem. I mean, Linda McMahon has been, I'm not sure that she has any experience in the education field.
Well, she does.
Right?
She does.
Oh, she does? Okay.
To be fair to her, she served on the Connecticut State Board of Education for a year.
Okay.
She's on the board of a university up there, I believe.
So Carl's going to take a dump on Dr. Oz here for not having any experience, even though I think that he also has some experience. But look, their jobs, as we've talked about repeatedly, are to shake things up. And Linda McMahon has certainly been someone who has done that. After Trump left, she started AFPI, the America First Policy Institute, and turned that into sort of this behemoth policy shop that kept the America First movement sort of at the forefront over the last 4 years. She is loyal to Trump. I think Trump really likes her. She's very well respected within sort of the MAGA community. And so we'll see how she does. But I'm not going to jump and denounce all these folks necessarily, especially since if we look at who's been running these cabinet positions for the last 4 years, everybody was completely fine with Pete Buttigieg running the Department of Transportation and some of these other folks. And how's that gone? So taking a different approach isn't necessarily a bad thing. But again, the proof will be in the pudding.
Carl, what do you think?
Well, I think I was consistently critical of Pete Buttigieg's Department Secretary of Transportation. I did not feel he was qualified for that job. In all seriousness, there's something valid to what Tom is saying, and it's this. It has been, Andy, as you know, since the Nixon administration, that cabinet officials really ran their agencies. Federal policy is now run through the White House. It has been for the last 5 or 6 presidents. You can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I have problems with it because it bottlenecks the system and it makes every decision, even decisions that shouldn't be partisan, puts them in a partisan cast. However, since that's the way it works, and Trump seems to have realized this now, and he didn't necessarily this first time he was president, he'd never had any political experience whatsoever. If that's the case, then having people who are loyal to you and who have proven that loyalty to you and share your vision about government makes some sense. I will say that.
And I would add this. I think we sort of maybe misunderstand or misrepresent what it means to head one of these agencies as a political appointee. I mean, there's an entire professional, long-time class that runs these things. And then you bring in assistant secretaries, you bring in people, chief of staff, all that sort of stuff. So the idea that you don't have, deep expertise in running something is not necessarily a disqualification. As we found in the past. I mean, look at Secretary Bennett, who ran the Department of Education. Bill Bennett was considered a success. He didn't have any particular administrative experience, certainly less than she does. But also, if the idea is that what they're trying to do is close down the Department of Education, maybe she is the right person for the job.
Well, that's what I was going to say, going back to Carl's point. Like, the thing about Trump is, and people who've worked for him, if you've talked to any of them, they will say this. Trump is not heavy on policy. He's not into debating every single policy. What he's going to do is deputize these folks to go out and say, I want, 10% off the top, cut this agency by 30%. Go do it. I don't care how you do it. I don't care. You don't have to just do it. And that's what they're going to be sent out to do. And so in that sense, it's not going to be some sort of policy bottleneck that's stopping at the White House.
And that's where Elon Musk comes in. Remember, he bought Twitter and laid off thousands of people without, as far as I could tell, any demonization, any loss in the quality of the site from a technical standpoint. So his view would be that those were extraneous people, and he's on the record, and other people are being that maybe government has that kind of fat too.
Yeah.
Did you guys see there's a clip going around of Milton Friedman being interviewed by Peter Robinson?
Yes.
You've seen that where he's sitting at the table and they go through every cabinet agency.
Yeah.
Keep or get rid of. And he gets rid of 10 of the 14, which is awesome. Yeah. It's a great clip and it's held up well for, he's been since. And then, Peter Robinson says to him, if you were a dictator, so this is what would happen. He said, I don't want to be a dictator. We have to be able to convince people that this is necessary. We don't have, we shouldn't arrogate the power to ourselves to be able to do this. We have to convince people that this is good policy and it's necessary and it's good for the country. And so we'll see whether, Trump's sort of on that road and we'll see whether he's able to do that or not.
Let's talk about that for 30 seconds, though. What would it take to get rid of the Department of Education as a cabinet level agency? An act of Congress.
Yeah.
But he's got majorities in Congress.
Right.
If he's serious about this, and I don't know that he is, he sounded serious about it during the campaign, Trump. He said things like, I can't wait to get rid of that agent. I'm dying to get rid of that agency. That would be a hell of a story.
Well, Democrats will filibuster that in the Senate, won't they? They'll never let that get through.
Well,
Chuck
Schumer's on the record of not wanting the filibuster, Tom.
Only when they were in power, please.
He was going to get rid of that. That.
I know, but
he said so.
Could you demote it so it's not a cabinet level agency anymore?
Still, it would take an act of it would take an act of Congress, and Congress also controls the money. Jimmy Carter got the act of Congress through, a Democratic Congress, and it would take a Republican Congress to get rid of it.
So we can never get rid of any of these agencies, Carl. That's what you're saying.
Unless you have 60 senators or you do away with the legislative filibuster.
Right. Well, I want to talk about something else too, which is the money that the Democrats burned through. This is really coming under scrutiny. They burned through $1.5 billion in 15 weeks, so that's $100 million a week. And some of this is coming out through forms they have to file. $500 million spent on television and digital ads, $2.5 million on digital influencers, $900,000 to advertise on the Las Vegas Sphere, and of course $2.5 million to Oprah Winfrey's production company to produce that talk show. Tom, doesn't look like the money was well spent, or they didn't get what they wanted for it. But how big a problem is this for the Democrats?
It's a problem. I mean, look, if they had won, we wouldn't even be talking about it. But they didn't win, and so this stuff gets scrutinized, and it is an astronomical sum of money that they spent, that they raised and spent. This doesn't include, what Biden. I mean, I think the number that I saw was over 2 billion, 2.1, 2.2, something like that. They spent a ton of money and didn't win a single swing state, not one. So it obviously wasn't effective. And, and we've talked about this before. I mean, look, at a certain point, money's important in a campaign, right? You need money to have volunteers and door knocks and print the mailers and do the social media and run the advertisements. But at some point, the value of money diminishes. You get diminishing returns, right? Having 5 million is good. Having 50 million is better. Having 500 million doesn't really help you that much. You can only run so many ads, right? You can only knock on so many doors. And if you can't get it done with your message, you could spend $5 billion and she still wouldn't have won. So I think this speaks to the fundamental issue that the campaign faced the entire time, which was they did not have a strategy to win over independent voters and those moderates on inflation and the economy. And no amount of money was going to change that.
Yeah. Well, they did spend $12 million on polling, which seemed someone made some money, and they spent $50 million on the door-to-door canvassers, Carl, in addition to whatever volunteers they had. But so, I mean, is Tom's point, I think, is right, is that it doesn't matter how much money you have at some point, but it also matters whether you spend it wisely. And I think it's going to look in retrospect, and maybe some of this money was not spent wisely.
Yeah, that's right. But it's going to look like all of it was not spent wisely if you think about the results. As Tom pointed out, of whatever this money, the sums just stagger the mind. But let's just $1 billion, $1.5 billion, almost all of it spent in 7 states, and they carried none of those states. What that suggests to you is that, to use the old marketing phrase, Kamala Harris was the dog food that the dog won't eat.
Right.
And that's just, they couldn't sell her. But there's another aspect of it. The Biden administration never acknowledged this, would deny it, that law with the Orwellian name, the Inflation Reduction Act. It's, pumped $1 trillion into the economy, that it contributed to inflation. Common sense tells you it contributed to inflation. But the Democrats, if I'm still getting emails every day from Kamala Harris in my inbox. Got one this morning. Send me $10 or $20, even $5. So not only did they spend all this money, they apparently spent more than they took in, as much as they took in. The campaign is in debt. That sort of goes to the almost parody of what people think about Democratic politicians and how they spend money like drunken sailors, and that's not a good look either.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break right now. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm talking to Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the media, Tom's favorite topic. So don't go away. We'll be back after this.
It's real, it's clear, and it's on POTUS.
It's Real Clear Politics.
Sirius XM 124. Honest reporting and an authentic picture of public disclosure. This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And as promised, a little media news. Tom, Comcast announced it's going to spin off a bunch of its cable networks into a new company. That means that MSNBC and CNBC, along with the Golf Channel and some other stuff, will become part of this new company. Believe it or not, it's called SpinCo. I think that's a perfect name for it. It's going to be owned by the current Comcast shareholders, but the play, I guess, is either to sell these assets off or gather in new assets and create a sort of a new company that's built all around cable networks alone. So is RCP preparing its bid for MSNBC, CNBC, something like that? What's going on?
I think between the three of us, we'd rather have the Golf Channel. That'd be more fun, certainly, and better for our mental health. No question about it. Look, I think this speaks to the fact that cable news continues to struggle, and certainly the properties that we're talking about here. And so they've made a decision. Now, they are going to keep Bravo and the Peacock streaming service within its NBC TV business.
Got to keep those housewives. I think
got
that's
to keep
Bravo,
the housewives,
right? And
got to keep the future, which is apparently streaming. But everybody else is getting shipped off to Siberia. This election in particular, I think, I don't know that we'll look back at it as a specific turning point, but there definitely was something about this election where the networks and cable news were sort of the old guard. They were almost irrelevant in many respects. And it was all about the new podcasts and alternative media and all of that. And I think powered, to a certain degree by X itself, which is becoming more and more of a player for news and all that. And so I think that's going to continue. I don't see that stopping. And that's not good news for these cable companies, especially the ones that are paying these hosts, these, exorbitant salaries for shows that nobody's watching. I mean, MSNBC has like 60,000 people watching in a primetime, 25 to 54 demo or something. I mean, that's crazy. And same thing with CNN. Now, Fox is in much better shape, obviously, and always has been since they launched. They're serving a different audience. But boy, if you are at CNN or MSNBC, it's looking pretty grim.
Yeah. Well, Carl, part of this that hasn't been remarked about as much, but is interesting, is that you're severing MSNBC and CNBC from the NBC mothership. So you do have people like Chris Jansen, Katie Tur, who are NBC personnel. What do? I mean, do they disappear from the network or are they licensed across? But it really, these things
Mitchell,
become sort of floating entities. It's harder to do the news, right?
Well, I don't know. Chuck Todd, Andrea Mitchell, there's a lot of these people who are on both NBC and NBC.
Andrea Mitchell's announced she's retiring, so she'll be. They're
going to have to figure this out. But if Tom and John McIntyre, Tom's co-owner and co-founder, put together a package and buy this, you guys can run the Golf Channel. I think I'll maybe go run MSNBC. And now that Mika and Joe have gone down and made their pieces, it's like Donald Trump, maybe we can expand our audience. I will. Sadly, I won't do it I'll do it with a heavy heart, but I will. Their salary is reputed to be $8 million apiece. I will decimate that. They will make $800,000 a piece. That's 1.6 million between them. Anybody in the world can live on that. That's still, each of them would make more than the three of us put together. And I think that would actually get MSNBC's finance. That one move of mine would get them on a better financial footing.
Well, there is this.
That's like buying a buggy whip company, Carl. It's
that's what the cord cutters say, Tom. It's true. You're right.
That is the question, whether it is a buggy whip company or whether this is a asset that is undervalued by the market at this point, because you do have cable contracts. I know a little bit about the cable industry. You have cable contracts, so you have a guaranteed income based on most cable is paid for by your cable bill. A buck here, buck there goes to.
Well, they're losing subscribers though, Andy. Which
yes,
is,
they're losing subscribers,
but
it's a big check, and it's a sort of guaranteed income. You can sort of project it, and then you have these cable carriage contracts, which say you can't turn MSNBC into the Golf Channel. It has to stay a news and public affairs channel. So you've got some restrictions that you have to work around, but. You could buy it and put on a bunch of streaming podcast hosts and probably do about as well in terms of numbers and cut your costs to.
Yeah, well, that's
honestly, you could put
I think
monkeys in front of the camera and not do any worse than they're doing now.
A test signal probably. You get about the same numbers.
The Panda Cam or whatever, bigger ratings.
Let's not go overboard, lads. But and let's also remember this in all seriousness. The news business has gone through cable, television, print journalism, even online ad revenues. This has been, the 21st century has been sort of a death spiral. We didn't mention this on Monday, but the Associated Press announced it's laying off 8% of its workforce. Nobody batted an eye. This is the kind of thing that's been happening. Rolling layoffs, diminished profits. So I think belt tightening is in order, but they shouldn't be ridiculed, for the size of the audience. It's very hard to build an audience and keep it. And it's hard to turn a profit in the news business.
Well, that's true. I would argue that part of the problem with the news business is the news itself, and they have disgraced themselves.
We were almost out of this.
I know.
Inches away from a clean getaway.
And one of the reasons they're suffering is because the product they've put out over the last 8-10 years has not met the expectations of consumers. Yes, there are market forces at work, but at the same time, they have repeatedly, I think, made their biases known and produced misinformation and lied to viewers and all of that. And that's part of what the problem is here.
All right. Well, Tom, we're glad you got that in because.
Thank you. Yes.
He would have had an ulcer if he had.
My blood pressure was going up.
Right. We just have a few minutes left in this segment, but I do want to talk about this new ad from Jaguar. It's being called Budlight 2.0. I was going to play a clip of it, but it's all music. There's no words, but
no cars either.
No cars. But here's how NBC described it. This is putting it, I think, in a nice way. A group of multiracial, gender-bending models emerge from an elevator in cutting-edge makeup and bright-colored clothing to a techno-industrial beat into an austere, prismatic landscape. And there's also a new Jaguar logo. You can see the ad online. You can see the logo. Tom, is this Budlight 2.0, or is this, as they say, these are the ads. This is what appears on the ad in sort of layover print. Create exuberant, live vivid, delete ordinary, break molds.
And copy nothing.
Copy nothing, tag. Yes. Thank you.
Which... If you want a good laugh, go online, find the Jaguar tweet, and then just read the comments because people are like, "Nobody, don't worry, nobody's going to copy that." And Elon Musk was the first one to weigh in and said, "Do you sell cars?" I mean, look. I was in the advertising business for a few years before I started RealClearPolitics, and I was young. I wasn't at the upper echelons and I wasn't even in the creative department. So, but it continues to mystify me how all of these folks. They look at the world and they think that they're so clever. They're going to do this thing which is so cutting edge, and they just absolutely fumble. There's a difference between trying to reinvent your brand or reposition your brand, and just absolutely blowing your brand up. And I think that's what Jaguar has done here. I mean, I remember when I was growing up back in like the early 70s or whatever. One of my family friends, they had the Jaguar XKE model, which was
love that car.
Long, the coupe with the
12-cylinder.
Yeah, 12-cylinder. I mean, this thing was a beast. And Jaguar always had the very sort of James Bond vibe to it. And I mean, maybe they've seen something in their, consumer data that thinks that transgender folks or non-binary folks are their new market. But what is that? 2% of the population, 1% of the population. Like, you need to sell cars to everybody. And I don't know why they think this is somehow going to help them do that. I mean, it's insane, quite frankly.
I've actually been to the Jaguar factory in England. I was there for doing reporting. Is
it still in England, or is it now in India or China?
No, it's in
England, and it was. For me, it was a pilgrimage. I love British cars, and my dad drove an MG, and nothing was cooler than a Jaguar car back in the day. But they've actually paused making cars altogether because
listen,
there's no demand for them.
Well, what Jaguar is announcing or trying to with this ad, they didn't really, is that their future is an all-electric future. That's supposed to be what this
also weird, insane.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's insane or not, but that's what this oddball ad is supposed to be part of a campaign. I think there are more ads coming in this ad campaign.
We'll see about that.
Jaguar as much as said so. That's right. But I didn't mind the gender bending and the oddball costumes and hairstyles. But as I'm looking at these young people, they're people who don't even drive cars, let alone Jaguars. They ride bikes or take the subway. They believe in global warming. I mean, I guess this thing is like too cute by half, but you just wonder if you're trying to reinvent the wheel. If you're going to sell a car, maybe you ought to show the car.
Right. Well, my favorite comment, Tom, when you were talking about him before, was this, it said the only brave thing about this ad is to leave the comment section on. So if you do want to laugh, go to one of your social media sites.
Very humorous, yeah.
Look at the comments. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after this.
Online at RealClearPolitics.com.
On air on Sirius XM Channel 124.
Real Clear Politics is on POTUS. Real Clear Politics. A neutral, even-handed arbiter of political data. You're listening to POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for RCP, and I'm joined now by South Carolina Representative Nancy Mace, who has introduced a resolution that would require members of Congress to use the restrooms and facilities that correspond with their biological sex. The resolution comes as Rep-elect Sarah McBride, a Democrat from Delaware, prepares to take office as the first transgender member of Congress. Congresswoman, let's dive in. McBride has called this a manufactured culture war and a distraction, but you've drawn a line in the sand. Why?
Well, because this isn't manufactured. Like, this is real. It's on the front doorstep. And look, let me just say right off the bat, I am very much a civil rights, civil liberties person. I voted for gay marriage, not once, but twice. I have voted for protections and legislation to protect LGBTQ individuals. Okay. But I, as a woman, draw a line in the sand about biological men who want to force their genitalia, their penises, their junk into our private spaces. And I'm a survivor of rape. I was raped at the age of 16, but also not just the sexual violence I've endured, but I've endured sexual abuse, and I have PTSD from that abuse. And just the idea that a man would force himself into our dressing rooms or in our locker rooms, or in the stall next to me, and his junk. It's an assault on women. And I know how vulnerable women and girls are based on my own personal experiences. And this is a big fat red line in the sand for me. I mean, you can only go so far, and I'm not going to strip women's rights away from 0.5% of the country. At some point, you have to say no more. Like, it's just not okay. And we saw the video, for example, earlier this year of Planet Fitness in Alaska. Here was a middle-aged man with a beard, with boxers, with his willy-nilly, dancing around, prancing around in a locker room. In the corner of that photo was a 12-year-old girl in a towel naked. It's not okay. And I just really, I'm so passionate. I mean, I was the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina. I know how hard women have fought for our achievements and our successes, and I'm not going to allow it to be stripped away by a man or any man.
And we've seen this come to the fore. I mean, Republicans campaigned on this issue. I'm thinking of President-elect Trump's campaign ads where he told voters that Harris was for they, them. And yet some of your colleagues seem to be running away from this issue on the Hill. For instance, what do you make of Representative Tom Cole, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, telling reporters yesterday that he was trying to, quote, avoid the great bathroom debate?
Well, I'm going to put all of my male colleagues on notice. Like, I want you on record. I want to know if you respect the dignity of your female colleagues. Do women on the Hill have rights, or do we not? Are you going to force this down our throats? Or are you going to respect us and respect our rights as women? We are colleagues, and this is something that is going to affect us, not them. It doesn't affect my male colleagues. It affects the women who are here. And there are a number of us on the Hill, not just members of Congress, but there are female employees and staffers who are also survivors of assault, who are survivors of sexual violence. And just the idea of a man and his genitals being in our private spaces is just absurd. And it just makes us as women more vulnerable.
Well, let me ask you this then. If Republicans sidestep this issue with Representative McBride, do you think they were ever serious about all of those press releases and messaging bills that they put out on girls' sports? Do you see this current debate as a litmus test for the larger issue that you've been talking about?
Well, I will tell you, I'm going to force the issue. I mean, I don't make threats. I make promises. I will force a vote on this if I have to. And there's several different ways to go about doing that procedurally. And we've been talking to and working with the parliamentarian on that. This is a real issue. And I'm not just going to stop on Capitol Hill. I've heard from a lot of people around the country, a lot of women who are saying, what about us? It's not just on the Capitol. It's at our schools. It's at institutions of higher learning. It's in my office building. So I filed a bill this morning that would extend the same protections for women across the country on all federal property. And then I'm working on another piece of legislation that if you get any federal funding, then it's going to apply to you too. And so we have to put our money where our mouth is. And inflation and spending was on the ballot in November. Illegal immigration was, but so too were women's issues. Mm-hmm. And so what are we going to do to protect women? This is a real issue. It's really happening. It's not fake. It's not manufactured. It's on our front doorstep. And at some point, we have to affirm women's rights.
That's a perfect segue to some of the pushback. I mean, for instance, on the flip side of this they, them binary that the president-elect seemed to set up, implying that Democrats were more concerned with a particular slice of the electorate than Americans overall. You have some Democrats now, like Kate Bedingfield, the former White House comms director, saying on CNN yesterday, that in a way you're guilty of doing what Trump accused Democrats of, that you're zeroing in on a specific issue that affects a single member of Congress rather than those challenges that you mentioned a second ago, like immigration, like inflation. What's your response to that criticism?
It's the height of gaslighting. And I'm sick and tired of being gaslit over normalcy, over common sense. This affects every single woman and every single girl across the country. And the issue isn't getting better, it's getting worse. We're being force-fed an ideology that is not based on science. And women are vulnerable. They are extremely vulnerable, particularly in places where they believe they have the right to privacy. And we have the right to privacy in our bathrooms, in our dressing rooms, in our locker rooms. And at the end of the day, women's rights are human rights. And are we going to pick up the mantle and say, yes, you are worth fighting for. Your rights will be protected. And if I'm going to be the lone wolf on this, if I'm going to be the only one in the country standing up for women everywhere, I will carry that mantle. I will take all the arrows. I will take all the attacks, the name calling, the death threats on my life. I mean, there are literally men right now in dresses who want to kill me because I want to protect women's private spaces.
I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the pushback that you've received here in a moment. But before we get there, take us behind the scenes of the GOP conference doors. I mean, have you discussed this issue with Speaker Johnson, and are you open to any kind of compromise? Yesterday, at first, he said that this was a silly debate, and later he clarified that a man cannot become a woman, but there wasn't any clear direction, it seemed, from his press conferences.
It did come up at our conference meeting yesterday, and I spoke to Speaker Johnson multiple times earlier this week about this, and he assured me that it would be in the House rules package. Now, if it's not in the House rules package, then I will produce an amendment and request a vote on adding it into the House rules package. And if that doesn't work, then I will absolutely 100% guarantee you, promise, I don't make threats, make promises, I will file a privileged motion and force a vote on this issue. I want to know where my colleagues stand on women's rights. Do you respect us? Do you respect our dignity? Do we have rights or not? And this is a litmus test for every woman across the country. And look, I've heard from a lot of friends of mine, lesbian couples, gay friends, Democrats, everyone I've heard from, whether you're independent, Democrat, left of center, moderate, obviously conservatives are with me, but everyone I've talked to across the political spectrum, except for the raging radical left, like they're with me on this and they're encouraging me to continue the fight. And I'm appreciative of the support because there's a lot of political diversity in our country, but this is a place where most of us agree.
I want to ask you about something that I've noticed in your gaggles and remarks with reporters. During your remarks yesterday, for instance, when you were referring to Representative-elect McBride, you used the representative's preferred pronouns. You called the representative she. Was that an intentional distinction?
I've used both. I've used he and she. I've used a mix. I've used both. I'm not going to submit to the pressure. I'm not going to submit to the threats. The idea that he would force himself into our private spaces is just off the rails to me. I do my best to be respectful, but this is a place where I just will not accept the absurd idea that a man can force his penis into our private spaces. It's just not going to be there on that.
Normally these debates happen and there's a lot of name calling back and forth, but a moment ago you mentioned some of the death threats that you've received as a result of this resolution. And there's even video that we have seen of some individuals making threats on your life. So has the House Sergeant of Arms been made aware of these threats? And is there anything you can say about any additional precautions you might be taking?
Yes. So I actually spoke to Capitol Police this morning, and my office staff was in communication reporting these threats. I'm getting threats via direct message. I'm getting them via phone messages, phone calls, email, all those sorts of things. On social media, we post an example because mainstream media was like, show proof of the threat. We did. And then it was crickets, right? But we have reported the threats really started to dial up yesterday. And so I spoke with Capitol Police this morning. And I will do what I have to protect myself and my family. I take the safety of my family very seriously. This is not the first time I have been threatened, but I will tell you, it's been the most, I think, violent rhetoric publicly that I've ever seen in my life. Like using knife imagery to say that I should prepare to die. I mean, I can't, it's wild. It's wild to me. And this is, I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to be bullied. People forget, they don't know my history. I'm a high school dropout. I eventually made it to college where I made history. I was the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina. I have broken glass ceilings my entire life. In fact, I'm the first Republican woman elected to the U.S. House from my home state of South Carolina ever in its history. And so, I've been celebrated as a feminist and someone who's broken glass ceilings for women. And it's the time that I say, hey, is now. I'm going to fight for women's rights and continue this battle. They're threatening to kill me because I don't want penises in my locker room. I don't want men watching me change. It's insane to me. It's not normal. It's not normal. That's not where most people are.
Well, we will have to leave it there. Congresswoman, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Philip Wegmann. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM, and we will be right back after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics
on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics. Talking now with Lee Fang, who's a reporter in California and is an investigative reporter, one of the best in the business, and has a fascinating story that ran both on Real Clear Investigations, Lee writes for, and we put it on the front page of Real Clear Politics Wednesday morning because it's such an interesting piece and cuts across the grain in many different ways. I'm actually the headline is Food Lobbyists Plot to Have It Their Way with RFK Jr. And as everybody knows, if you're listening to this show, you care about politics, and President-elect Trump has tapped Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to join the cabinet and be involved in health care. And I'm just going to read you Lee's lead, and then I'm going to ask Lee a question about it. Here's the lead. America's most famous fast food fan may be an unlikely candidate to make America healthy again, but Donald Trump seems willing to tackle the eating habits that have led to skyrocketing rates of obesity. That's surprising enough. And then the hook. The junk food industry is not loving it. So Lee, Robert F. Kennedy, turns out, you think of him, you think, all right, he's the son of Robert Kennedy, scion of a famous political family, lifelong Democrat, environmentalist lawyer, a lot of criticism for statements he's made over the years about vaccines, skepticism about vaccines. But there's another aspect to him that you write about, and that is his obsession, his deep concern with health of food that is produced in the United States.
No, that's right, Carl. This is kind of the paradox of Trump. He represents some contradictions. He's the president who formerly very pro-choice, who ended up appointing the judges that overturned Roe v. Wade. He's the Republican politician who reconfigured the entire political map by blowing up these kind of Republican orthodoxies around free trade, around NAFTA, that, he was able to win the blue wall, more Rust Belt states with this new political paradigm. And he's done it again in 2024 in this election. He won over huge swaths of formerly Democratic constituencies by presenting an unorthodox agenda. And this campaign cycle, he was really focused on cultivating major health and wellness voices, and of course, forming this new political alliance with Robert F. Kennedy, this former Democrat turned independent consumer and environmental rights attorney, someone who's spent his entire career working on getting, toxic pesticides and food additives out of the system and, following lawsuits and crusading for public health and wellness. Donald Trump, I got to give credit to the Real Clear Politics editors. They helped clean up this piece, and they kind of wrote that great headline. So, credit where it's due there. But yeah, big contradictions there, that we have Donald Trump, who loves fast food, who is not kind of emblematic of healthy living, at least according to RFK's vision. And he's created this alliance with someone who's promising to reform the food system, our new kind of nutritional habits, our food safety standards. And it's just super interesting.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about this political dimension. Then I want to ask you about exactly what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has in mind about the health food industry and about the pushback of the lobbyists. But first of all, to what you say about Trump's politics, partly we've seen this movie before. You may be too young, but, there was a Republican who came out of California and he carried 59 states when he ran for re-election, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a conservative, but he connected with working class people on cultural issues. And they were tens of millions of people who'd never voted Republican in their lives voted for him. We call them Reagan Democrats. A lot of them stayed in the party. But what's happening now is seemingly more unnatural and more interesting a phenomenon. Trump's a populist. And when you point out he used to be pro-choice, the thought occurs, it's a thought experiment. He could have run as a Democrat. Now, he would have had the demagogue on a different set of issues. Abortion would have been one of them. But he's not primarily an ideological person at all. He's a populist. In a way, the first truly populist president we've had since Andrew Jackson. And so because he's not a policy guy per se, and he's not really an ideologue, he's got people in any conventional way. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a classic liberal. But Trump feels comfortable with him. Elon Musk was a liberal before the Biden administration alienated him. But he's got these people around him. Some are very right-wing. Some are, we would have said before, were left-wing. But what they have in common is they're disruptors. They kind of want to blow up the status quo. And Kennedy wants to do that on health food. Well, let's talk a little bit about what his vision is for the food industry.
Yeah, that's right. RFK has filed lawsuits and fought and talked about our toxic food industry. He's talked about how the corn subsidies that our government provides has incentivized the overuse of high fructose corn syrup. You find it in cereal and snack foods. And, all kinds of different food items that are ubiquitous in our groceries and in our fast food restaurants. He's talked about nutrition standards. He's talked about food additives. I know this is really interesting. In the content you see during the election system, I thought one of the most interesting videos of this entire year that was not remarked upon by the New York Times or any of the big kind of campaign coverage media outlets was RFK's Make America Healthy Again video in support of Donald Trump that he released during the campaign that talked about yellow dye 5, tartrazine. And this is something that's added to all kinds of different snack foods. It's added to as a coloring for cereal. It's linked to cognitive problems, behavioral problems in children.
Well, Lee, I have to confess, after reading your piece, I went and had a bag of Doritos. I wasn't sure I'd get one. Cheese Doritos they'd be on sale this time next year. But go ahead. In all seriousness.
That's right. I mean, gosh, what's even going to be available in the future? Because our food is unique. You look around the Western industrialized world. You even go to Canada. You buy Captain Crunch. You can't even buy Doritos in some of these countries because they put so many food additives that have been banned in most of the world. And RFK has really highlighted this issue. It's something that you would associate with Ralph Nader or, the kind of progressive left, the nanny state government types that want to, kind of regulate our food supply. But he's tapped into something that's very new. I think the left missed this just because of the pathologies of the left. The left will only read the New York Times. They'll only care about an issue if it's on the front pages of the New Yorker, in the more kind of prominent elite press. But if you look on TikTok, you look at the independent podcasters, you look at Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and some of these folks that are garnering millions, tens of millions of listeners, way more bigger audiences than the elite press. They talk about this every day. It's an obsession with kind of, and these aren't kind of elite topics. I mean, their audiences are blue collar or working class, middle class folks, in the center of this country. And
you're listening to Lee Fang, investigative reporter who wrote a piece for RealClear Investigations that's on the front page of RealClearPolitics and RealClear Investigations this week. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for RealClearPolitics. You're listening to RCP Radio on Sirius XM Radio. Go ahead, Lee.
What RFK has tapped into, and he's brought in these podcasters, he's brought on some of these health influencers types, is that we've got to do something about it. There is kind of a conspiracy against the consumer that companies that are profit seeking, they just want to keep food cheap by making it kind of adding so many preservatives that it can last on the shelf for years and years. They want to make it addictive. They want to kind of tap in.
Well, they do that mostly with salt and sugar, right?
It's salt and sugar, but there are also other additives that add a crunchiness that kind of tap into how your body receives salt and sugar to make the intake into the blood flow and into your food receptors more heightened. It's really the same type of food chemistry, human psychology, the same science that the cigarette companies use to make their products more addictive. In some cases, some of the cigarette makers are the same companies as the food process makers. It's the same group of scientists working on it. And again, these are issues that have been talked about on the left for a very long time. But here was an opportunity. This is again kind of speaks to what you were saying, that Trump is a true populist. Where many other politicians miss this, he was able to observe that there is a sea change happening in America. This is talked about on a daily basis on the podcast, on social media, not talked about in the elite press. He was able to tap into it with RFK as his kind of ambassador to this movement. And RFK.
Well, Lee, we've got about a minute left. Tell our listeners, and again, they can read your whole story on Real Clear Politics. But so the food industry is not going to take this lying down. Like I said, we got about a minute left. Tell our listeners about some of the pushback that's going to be happening.
Well, perhaps it will shock no one for your listeners that the food industry is very upset about the prospects of RFK and his agenda. They've plotted and planned how to stymie him, how to undermine him, how to block his reforms. They're hoping to use the congressional appropriations process, the Senate confirmation process, even placing ad dollars on programs like Joe Rogan to kind of influence this kind of grassroots base of support. So, read the piece. We kind of lay it out. We got exclusive access to the junk food lobbyists' internal memos and their strategy documents. So we lay it all out there. And, who knows what's going to happen next? It's an exciting time in Washington.
Well, thank you, Lee Fang, and we'll have you on next time you have a scoop. If you don't know his work, Lee's one of the best young investigative reporters. He's one of the best investigative reporters in this country of any age. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for Real Clear Politics. You've been listening to RCP on Sirius XM Radio. Join us again tomorrow, same time, 3 p.m. in the West, where Lee lives, and 6 p.m. here in the East.
The
Politics
of
the
United
States. This is POTUS on Sirius XM Channel 124.